With a chunky 40-minute download time, I wasn't sure what to expect from Malediction. It looked pretty colourful and magic related, but that was about all the info I had on it. I started it up to a scenic menu styled like a spellbook with no background music, with a few options to look through, not including keybinds, a continue and a new game option. The game has 3 save slots to use, so I just got into it with a new one. The game is voice acted. You get told a short tale about a trainee in black magic who gets a bit too ambitious and manages to duplicate himself, so with the help of his talking grimoire, suitably named Grim, and the bits of power his clones left him when they ran away with the rest, he has to try and hunt them down and eradicate them and bring back his magic power. Game premise set, I was dropped into a Halloween-esque town with some nice contrasting lights and darks, some moving spooky trees, and a lot of corners that have a grudge against the camera, with one particular fence giving me the power to look into my own head. The character model is quite floaty and always moving. It's a pretty similar visual experience to Scamp Hi-Hat Havoc, and the flowy character reminds me of the Maya of the Desert sprite. I'm pretty sure it's made in the same engine at least. There are sound effects for all the footsteps, and there's background music that's decent and changes for each of the stages. On my journey through the streets of this slightly dishevelled, abandoned town, I learned about the powers I had, whilst beady eyes peeked at me from the shadows like old people peeping from behind their living room curtains. I had the power to push objects, mainly boxes, of which a lot were lying around. The game is part puzzly, part platformy, and introduces the basics pretty well. You can play keyboard and mouse or controller, and most of the powers are controlled by the same buttons, but mostly it's the usual WASD to move, space to jump, and left click was to push stuff. You can die by falling into water, even incredibly shallow water. At first you have to actively try to die, but it becomes a bigger hazard a bit later, and there are more hazards that appear as well. There are gargoyles that shoot fire at you, and the most notorious enemy of sorts is the Rolling Skull Barrel, which is a player in most of the clone fights. There are 3 clones to fight, found in each of the 3 environment areas, and each boss fight has its own key way to beat the enemy that you have to figure out. In general, the character controls well. It can be a little floaty and hard to maneuver at times, but this only came into play for the final fight as there were some finicky jumps to make at points. The game likes invisible walls, and lets you be a bit creative, but not too far. I tried to take a piece of rock with me somewhere to help me platform further along, and the game gave me a big nope on that one. Turns out I didn't need it, but there's always space to gimmick in platformers. There are 2 potions you can pick up, X-ray potions which allow you to see important levers highlighted in yellow, which you can interact with through walls, and health potions. It's fairly easy to avoid damage at first, but it does become a bit harder later on. Your push power evolves into a general telekinesis power, so you can pick up and move stuff, and you also gain a time stop ability, which then evolves into a timeline scroll ability, where, for example, if an object has fallen, you can freeze it, revert it to a point mid-fall, and it stays there. You can use both of these at the same time, so for example you can freeze a gargoyle in time to stop it from attacking you, whilst you pick up something else with your power, and the game adds matching glowy effects to your character model. You also have a time slow bubble ability, which slows projectiles before they reach you to give you a better chance to run out of their way, freeze them, or move dangerous things out the way. The freeze time is mouse 2 and the bubble is E, so you can use as much of this stuff together as you want pretty easily. And whilst they're all fairly simple, they work really well together and are all needed from the point you get them to the end of the game in the fights and puzzles. There are a few complaints about the sturdiness of the game in the Steam reviews. I did have the game crash on me once at the start of the second phase of the final boss, but I was a little impatient with wanting to run places and do things while it made me watch cutscenes, so I think I overloaded it a little. But that was my only crash, and other than a bit of lag in an area with a lot of dangerous obstacles, I didn't have any crippling crash issues to the degree of not being able to participate in or finish the final boss fight, as some did. There were a couple of things that I didn't like as much, one being the invisible walls, since it was good fun to play with the powers, but that extra flexibility for being creative wasn't really allowed. The handling was a little hard, especially in the final boss, and some of the attacks from the bosses come so fast you don't stand much chance of dodging them. The final boss especially is bad for this, because he can third or even half your health depending on what he hits you with, There are 2 health potions in the room to help you, but of course you have to get to them first. Plus, when a new phase starts, he pretty much spawns on top of you, making it impossible to dodge him at that range. The cutscenes in the final fight broke the pace a little for me, and something about the fact the background music doesn't change from the standard level music for boss fights seems a bit weird, but all of those are fairly minor points and I could get around them in the end. There are loads of good parts to it though. It's visually appealing, the mechanics are creative, and being able to combine them for platforming is great. Every boss fight and environment is unique, and whilst Grimm can be too helpful at times in telling you what to do, mostly the game leaves you to figure out what gimmick you need to beat the bosses. The voice acting is superb, really well done for the protagonist, clones, and Grimm, and the sound effects for footsteps and obstacles is really good. It took me an hour for one run, including some time I spent having no idea what to do with a cogwheel and running around like an idiot, so it's got pretty good duration to it. Replayability may be shot by the fact you've figured out all the puzzles the first time, but it's good to kill an hour or so. Though some people seem to have issues with running the game, I didn't experience that, so I would recommend giving a try for a short bit of puzzler platformer fun. It's a Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy game made by Desert Beagle Studios, a student project which has done really well. For all of that, I will give Malediction a 7.5 out of 10.